Welcome to Every Folk Song, a podcast about every song in the Roud Folk Music Index. I'm Matt Alcamp, your guide through this world of song tradition, the boggy mire of how songs and stories change over time. This episode focuses on Roud 1, the Raggle Taggle Gypsy. Stick with us. Hey there, thanks for joining me on this, the first ever episode of Every Folk Song, with me, Matt Alcamp. Today, I want to start at the very beginning of the index and talk to you about the song Raggle Taggle Gypsy, Roud 1, Child 200, but who cares about Child? But first, seeing as how this is the first episode in the series, I figure we should start by talking about the Roud Index itself, and a little about what this podcast is. The Roud Folk Song Index is exactly what it sounds like. An index of folk songs created by a man named Roud, Steve Roud, a local studies librarian from East Sussex, England. Born in 1949, Steve grew up in the 1960s, an era of music obsession. With the Beatles leading the British invasion, the advent of Motown, the 60s were a decade that saw rock and roll hit its crest, seeing it spin off into psychedelic rock, proto-punk, garage rock, surf rock, and most importantly to our subject matter, folk rock. Artists like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger were digging into the rich history of American folk music and dredging it up for a whole new generation of drugged-up, politically aware, bohemian youth to ponder over. The flower children of the 1960s may not have all fully realized it, though I'm sure at least a fair number did, but they were dipping their toes into centuries-long traditions, enjoying stories that had been carried across cultures and continents. Well, largely English-speaking ones anyway. So, enter Steve Roud. To see him now, he's a kind of a quirky, gentle man in his 1960s. I should add here that Steve has in no way acknowledged or endorsed this podcast. I mean, well, no one has. But also, Steve hasn't. You can imagine a slightly dorky young kid looking at his collection of Freddie and the Dreamers records or whatever and getting overwhelmed. This song is on that B-side, but it's basically exactly the same as that Beatles song on that record where they do a cover of that Isley Brothers song. Or, speaking of the Beatles, why is Chuck Berry singing Roll Over Beethoven? Why is this album dated 1956 when With the Beatles didn't come out until 1963? And why is this one called the Beatles' second album when basically it's their sixth? And what's the difference between the Zombies album, Begin Here, and the Zombies album, The Zombies? And remember, the closest thing to the internet at this point was, a magazine. It only takes a bit of an obsessive personality to do what Steve did. He grabbed some index cards and he started making a catalog. A fairly common practice among kids in that era, or so Steve said in a talk that I've heard. I'm only 27. So I imagine the switch from a rock and roll catalog, which Steve said that he threw into the trash, to a folk music catalog was because of the folk music revival, which I mentioned earlier. In fact, the first song in the index is one that's been covered by Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan, Dumb Pete Seeger, Davy Graham, Almeda Riddle, and other celebrated artists of that folk revival period. The index itself is largely boring. It's text-based, so it serves more as a research aid than a fun thing to peruse on a lazy Sunday. It's hosted by the English Folk and Dance Society. You can find it at library.efdss.org. And it can be a bit difficult if you're not used to looking at such things, which I was not. Which is why I'm so grateful to Wikipedia for having my back as I dug through the thing. It's an index of almost 200,000 instances of close to 25,000 different songs in the English-speaking oral tradition. So each Roud number, I mentioned earlier that the song we'd be looking at today is Roud 1, where we're going to be going in order as the series progresses. Each Roud number correlates to a series of recorded songs and broadsides, which have been deemed to be essentially the same. Which is difficult, because a song can change so much over time. The knight or whoever the subject of the song is can become a cowboy, can become a sailor, can become an elf. I don't know. He can go from dying a horrible death, which is described in the song, to pondering what would happen if he had died a horrible death, to his girlfriend dying a horrible death, to causing the same horrible death of somebody else. But the more you dig through, the clearer it becomes that the groupings are fair. You might say it's less of a science and more of an art. Out of 4,000 songs of the devil trying to rape a lady and having to overcome a series of challenges to do it, how do you determine which ones are Scarborough Fair and which ones are riddles wisely expounded? Especially when half of both are called the Elfin Knight. So the Roud number does that for you. Everything with the same Roud number fits into the evolution chain of a single song. So, what this podcast is. I, being a crazy person, got to thinking about the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star one day, just randomly, and where that song came from. A little Googling led me to the Roud Folk Song Index, which I'd never heard of before, and I instantly became obsessed and thought it would give me a nice picture of the Anglo-European world from 1600 to present day to listen to and learn about every song in the index. At the time of starting the podcast, I'm only to 14. There's a lot of data on these songs. Most of them that I've encountered so far have had 400 years to gather convolution. But also it's kind of fun, and I like being an eccentric, so that's what this podcast is. I'm going to break down these 25,000 songs and their major versions one at a time every 2 weeks or so until I get sick of it or die. There's no way I complete this project. And I should state, I'm no expert. I have no degree in history or music or folklore. I have a high school diploma from a hippie school called Upatina's, derived from the fact that the school used to be up the hill at a lady named Tina's house. But if you find it as interesting as I do, even if you can't explain why, then hang out with me as I try to figure this all out. I think it'll be kind of cool. Anyway, that's enough introduction. Let's hear the song.
Little three old gypsies came to Waldor. They came brave and bold, yo. One sang high and the other sang low, and the other sang Raggle Taggle Gypsy, yo.
Round 1 is Raggle Taggle Gypsy, or Blackjack Davy, or the Gypsy Laddie, or Black-Eyed Gypsy, or Whistling Gypsy, or Johnny Fa, or Seven Yellow Gypsies, or the Draggle-Tail Gypsy, or the Raggle Taggle Gypsy, or Gypsy Davy, or Gypsy Rover, or Gypsy Lottie, or Seven Gypsies on Yon Hill, or Harrison Brady. Well, don't worry. There's only really a few versions that are important to know here. I just wanted to freak you out for a second. The earliest versions are most likely more modeled on Seven Yellow Gypsies, but I want to start with Blackjack Davy. Mostly because I think it'll be more familiar to you, and I don't want you to stop listening. I crave attention. You might have heard this one, recorded by the White Stripes in 2003.
Blackjack Davy come running on back, whistling loud and merry. He prayed the words around him rang, and it charmed the heart of a lady. Charmed the heart of a lady. How old are you, my pretty little miss? How old are you, my honey? She answered him with a loving smile. I'll be 16 come Sunday. Said I'll be 16 come Sunday.
Kind of rocks. Called Blackjack Davy. It's modeled after the 1992 Bob Dylan song of the same name.
Never will want for money. Never will want for money. Fell off them high heel shoes all made of Spanish leather. Get behind me on my horse and we'll ride.
Now, I want to play you the two versions that Bob Dylan most certainly was inspired by, but first, this is kind of cool. Recorded live by I don't know who. I apologize for the quality. It's Elliott Smith.
At night the most inquiring about his lady. The maid spoke before him, she thought he'd gone with Blackjack Davy. Roll on for Blackjack Davy. Myself and me, my cold black stars, quicker than the grave. I roll all day and I'll ride all night, and I'll overtake my lady. I'll bring back my lady.
Anything that guy sings breaks my heart. But anyway, as I was saying, Bob Dylan recorded his most recent and popular arrangement of the song in 1992. But it was recorded by some heroes of Dylan quite a bit before that. Back to back, you're going to hear Almeda Riddle's song Blackjack Davy, recorded in 1960. But first, it's Woody Guthrie's Gypsy Davy, recorded by record label head and renowned American folk music archivist Moses Ashe in 1944.
It was late last night when the boss come home, is asking about his lady. The only answer he received, she's gone with the Gypsy Davy, gone with the Gypsy Dave. Go saddle for me my buckskin horse and $100 saddle. Point out to me their wagon tracks, and after them I'll travel, after them I'll ride. Well, I had not rode till the midnight moon, till I saw the campfire gleaming. I heard the notes of the big guitar and the voice of the gypsy singing that song of the Gypsy Day.
Together. That night her husband, he came home just looking for his lady. Her maid, she spoke before she thought, said she's with Blackjack Davy. She's gone with Blackjack Davy. Oh, saddle me up my coal black stud, my white one's not so speedy. I've rode all day, I'll ride all night, and I'll overtake my lady, and I'll bring home my lady. He rode all night at broad daylight, he came to a river a-raging, and there he spied his darling bride.
Now, one of the things that's so cool about all this to me is those songs that you've heard thus far are all the same song. They're the same story, told in similar ways, similar chords, similar lyrics, but they all speak to different qualities, both about the song and about the people playing them. It's either heavy, or dark, or sad, or uniquely American, or haunting. I think that's what's so captivating about folk music, is that it's not just what each artist brings to the song. There's a depth to the songs already. It's more about what each artist pulls out of the song. Now, I'm not going to play a full song because I'm not sure what the limitations of fair use are. Copyright laws are some of the weirdest and most convoluted in the world. I believe if we're playing the songs to critique or comment or teach, it's okay, but to be safe, I'm trying to keep it all under 30 seconds or so. So as I tell you the story of Blackjack Davy, behind me I've inexpertly cut together a series of versions of the song to tell it front to back. Alright, here we go.
Blackjack Davy was riding through the woods, singing his song so gaily.
The song is about a woman, sometimes of noble birth, sometimes the wife of a high-ranking boss, or a landlord, sometimes just wife, or maid, usually with child.
How old are you, my pretty little miss? How old are you, my honey? She answered him with a loving smile. I'll be 16 a Sunday.
One night her husband comes home and finds her missing. He goes about town asking where she could have possibly gone, and the people of the town tell him, she's run off with Blackjack Davy, or the Gypsy Davy, or Black-Eyed Davy, or maybe his name was Johnny Fox. Side note, John Faa of Dunbar is a historical figure from Scotland in the 1500s. Known as one of the many men to carry the title King of the Gypsies, he was also a character of the incredible Philip Pullman series His Dark Materials, for whatever that's worth. He was given rule over all gypsies in Scotland by King James IV in 1540, and again in 1553. His family continued to rule the gypsies throughout Scotland and the surrounding areas for generations. Anyway. Sometimes, especially in other versions of the songs, the woman, the maiden, the wife was lured away by a series of gypsies. They come into town playing instruments, singing beautifully, and she just falls in love right there and wanders off, leaving her life of luxury, her husband, and her child behind. At this point in the story, usually the husband chases after her.
He rode all night till broad daylight. He come to a river all raging, and there he spied his darling bride in the arms of Blackjack Davy. In the arms of Blackjack
He takes his horse and he rides through the forest out of town and tracks her and the gypsies down. There he confronts her.
We'll ride home together. She soothed her with the music, he soothed her with the song. He sung till she was nearly crazy. She said,
Well, she pulled off those long blue gloves, all made of the finest leather, gave to him her lily white hand, and said goodbye forever, bid farewell forever.
How could you forsake me, he asks. How could you forsake your home, your child, your family? He usually pleads for her to come back home, and in most versions, she refuses. She loves Blackjack Davy. She loves her new life. She never wants to go back home. Sometimes she claims she was forced to marry him in the first place. Whether or not this is a surprise to him is left up to our imaginations.
I'm in love with Blackjack Davy.
Last night I slept on a fine, fine bed beside my husband and babies. Tonight I'll sleep on the cold, cold ground beside my Blackjack Davy, beside my Blackjack Davy.
Now, in Blackjack Davy and its variations, the song ends there. Last night I slept in a warm feather bed, so goes the song. Tonight I sleep on the cold, hard ground in the arms of Blackjack Davy. One is left to assume that the husband rides back home, rebuilds his life, or falls apart. His former lover, now an adopted gypsy, wandering the country, singing songs, playing instruments. It ends on a heartbreaking note, but also one of freedom and adventure. It's strange how breakups all have those two sides to them.
Singing through the green, green trees. Oh, Blackjack David is the name that a bear been alone in the forest for a long time, but now found a lady fair, and I love her and hold her.
Now, we leave the story of Blackjack Davy there. You've heard the ballad and heard a bit of how it evolved musically across the United States in the 1900s, but let's go back a bit and see how the song likely started. Most people believe it originated in the early 1700s, earliest instances appearing as the Gypsy Lottie in the Book of Roxburgh ballads, sometime between 1720 and 1724. Most of them focus on that Johnny Faa story, bringing into it the 6th Earl of Castle, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of these words right, Cassillis, Castle, I don't know. It was a story passed down through oral tradition where John Faa and his gypsies seduced his wife, and he caught up with them and hung them all to death from a tree that's now legendary in Scotland. A dual tree known as the Castle Tree. Here's Ian and Lorna Campbell with Johnny Faa.
Oh, come to your bed, says Johnny Faa. Oh, come to your bed, my dearie. For I vow and swear by the hilt of my sword that your lord shall nae more come near ye. I'll go to bed, my Johnny Fa, and I'll go to bed, my dearie. For I vow and swear by what passed yesterday.
There was a book that I stumbled across in my research by Charles S. Dougal called The Burns Country, which is a tour of places significant to the life of 18th century poet Robert Burns. And one of those places is the Castle Tree. Reading from the book, there is the usual circumstantial account of the origin of the ballad. John VI, Earl of Castle, a stern Covenanter, married Lady Jean Hamilton, daughter of the Earl of Haddington, a young lady already secretly betrothed to Sir John Fa, a gallant knight of Dunbar. In the absence of the lady's husband, her lover came to Castle disguised as a gypsy and persuaded her to elope with him. The gypsy's steps by which they forded the Doon can still be seen. Unfortunately for the fugitives, the Earl returned sooner than he was expected. He immediately set out in pursuit of the lovers and captured them with little difficulty. Sir John Fa and his gypsy companions were duly hanged from the branches of the Dool tree, and the lady was confined for the rest of her life in a small apartment in Maybole Castle. Though, he goes on to say, there is ample proof that this account is pure fiction. John VI, Earl of Castle, was devoted to his wife until her death in 1642. But there we see the potential origins of this tale. And the story of John Fa and the Countess, as it's often called, introduces a few elements that make this next version differ from Blackjack Davy significantly.
There were 7 yellow gypsies all in
The
a
song
gang.
7 Yellow Gypsies differs from Blackjack Davy in a few significant ways. I feel like I basically said that sentence already. First of all, it's always a group that comes by singing and dancing, and playing music and occasionally casting spells, and they charm a lady away from her life of luxury, you know. The husband comes home, she's not there, he chases her down, pleads with her. All incredibly similar to the other version, except, as is common with these old folk songs, as you'll see as the series goes on, this takes a bit of a dark turn. Most versions of the 7 Yellow Gypsies end exactly as the tale of John Fa, with every gypsy either hung or slain on the spot by the angry husband. Oftentimes the man is referred to as Lord, and occasionally that Lord is the Earl of Castle.
He's ridden o'er the high, high hills until he come to the morning, and there he's found his own dear wife, and she's in the arms of the 7 gypsies. Well, last night I slept in a feather bed, the sheets and the blankets around me. Tonight I slept in the cold open fields in the arms of Miss 7 gypsies.
And what care I for me new wedded lord? For I'm away with the 7 yellow gypsies. Oh, last night you slept in the goose feather bed, when the sheet turned down so bravely. Oh, and tonight you will sleep in the cold barn shed, all along with the 7 yellow gypsies. Oh, what care I for a goose feather bed, when the sheet turned down.
That was Nick Jones and Martin Carthy, in that order, both singing songs called The 7 Yellow Gypsies. Now check this one out. The Waterboys with Raggle Taggle Gypsy in 1990. This may be my favorite of the versions, Raggle Taggle Gypsy. As Blackjack Davy was circulating around America, being all dark and moody and dissonant, 7 Yellow Gypsies was morphing into Raggle Taggle Gypsy and hanging around Europe, being all jaunty. It appears that a guy named Cecil Sharp, a name we'll be hearing over and over, presumably, arranged the song into the way it's commonly known now. But as it was never a hit and traveled this folk circuit instead of the rock and roll circuit, it's hard to come up with a linear narrative of who was influenced by who, like it was with Blackjack Davy. But it's been embraced by Celtic bands, Irish and Scottish punk and pub rock bands, and why not? It's catchy, it's reminiscent of an old world sound, it's got flute and fiddle and a jaunty little beat. And you say, "Oh!" A single O with an exclamation point at the end to punctuate certain verses. What more could you want from an old folk song? Here are the scales.
Then gather for me a milk-white steed, and because the sea starts speedy, oh, and I will ride till I seek my bride. She's away with the Raggle Taggle Gypsy, oh. Well, now he rode east, he rode west, he rode north and south also, till he came to a wide open plain. That's where he spied his lady, oh.
Raggle Taggle Gypsy usually cuts the mass murder off the end like Blackjack Davy does, which I guess makes it the soft version. But certainly, it could get way softer. I submit this.
Go saddle to me the milk-white steed, the bonny black is not speedy. I'll ride all day, I'll ride all night till I overtake my lady.
Harrison Brady by Peggy Seeger. Taking place in Pittsburgh and sung to the tune of Yankee Doodle Dandy. Or this one, Whistling Gypsy by the Limelighters.
The whistling gypsy came over the hill, down through the valley so shady. He whistled and he sang till the greenwood rang, and he won the heart of a lady.
So when I call Raggle Taggle Gypsy soft, it's relative. Maybe it cuts off the mass murder, but sometimes it can sound like this.
There were 3 old gypsies came to our hall door. They came brave and boldly, oh. One sang high and the other sang low, and the other sang a Raggle Taggle Gypsy, oh. Well, it was upstairs, downstairs the lady went, put on a suit of leather, oh, and there was a cry from behind the door. She's away with the Raggle Taggle Gypsy, oh. Raggle Taggle Gypsy, oh. Raggle Taggle Gypsy, oh.
That's hedge school. So, we jumped around a bit, but I think we got there. That's the story of Gypsy Davy and his 7 yellow Raggle Taggle buddies and how they seduced Lady Castle or whoever and either were murdered or not. Those are all the major versions and some of my favorite ones. It's interesting how a story can morph, how it can be adapted into a song, how much the song can change and still basically stay exactly the same. And the core of this story, Raggle Taggle Gypsy, is one that's repeated all the time. Someone is trapped in a life of comfort or luxury, bored with the status quo and the fact that everything is laid out for them. From The Little Mermaid to Hemingway to the entire hippie movement to every film Judd Apatow does to the Pirates of the Caribbean, it's a theme that persists throughout culture. You get fed up with the life you're leading and the things that are expected from you. And sometimes you get over it and you trudge forward. You know, sometimes it's okay to have your vacation, but you have to go back home. Back to your family or your 9-to-5 or college or wherever. Leave your manic pixie dream gypsies and get back to your Lord Castle and his goose-down feather bed. Because maybe accepting that responsibility is what life's about. Or maybe it's not. Maybe all those colonists who ran away to join the Native Americans in the early days of the Americas were right. Maybe we should all leave our concrete prisons and go stake up some yurts in the woods. Get back to nature and song and dance. Gypsy Davy represents freedom, escape, being wild at heart, being young and restless, refusing to slow down or grow up, Neverland. If you're looking from the perspective of the lady, anyway. if you're the lord, the husband? You work hard ruling the country or whatever. Maybe you're a banker, or a knight, or a landlord, or an insurance salesman. You spend all day doing something you don't love, so that you can provide for what you do love. Creating a life of luxury, not just for yourself, but for the woman you love. The woman who just bore your child. The woman who will be waiting home for you tonight when you get done riding around on your white mare or taking grief from your 7 bosses or whatever. Can you imagine being in his head when he gets home and no one's there? When everyone in the village tells you that your wife, that love you have been struggling so hard to make happy, perhaps in a way she didn't want, true, but the woman you thought loved you back and would make all this worth it, she'd ran off with some handsome, dark-eyed free spirit. Everything you're not. Can you imagine the rage in his head, the grief, the terror, the blood feeling his face as he jumped on his horse and decided to ride after her? The wild emotional mania of that decision. The way he probably stopped to reconsider every few miles. To fight back some tears. Maybe he was wondering what he'd done wrong, trying to imagine how the people in the town could have been mistaken. She'd never run away from him, not her. She loved him. His heart would barely allow him to believe it. So much so that he had to see it. He had to ride for a full day and night just to confront her, in the vain hope that she'd simply taken leave of her senses. That if she could just see him, if he could just talk to her, she'd remember that she loves him, and they'd ride home together. They'd be happy still. It wasn't over. And then when he saw her, he pled desperately. A man of power, a man of respect in his hometown, he pled. And in a voice that was probably barely recognizable to him, she told him to turn around, to go home, that she'd be happier here and wants nothing more to do with him. You could see this as a story about freedom, sure. A woman breaking out of the life expected of her, to embrace a life where she controls her own destiny. Her shirking the boring loser and finding true love in a life where she's closer to nature and happiness and probably herself. But I see the song as a song of heartbreak, of how alien it feels when someone you love gives up on you and decides to love someone else. The lengths you'd go to make that just not be true.
Would you forsake your house and home? Would you forsake your baby? Would you forsake your husband to be with Blackjack Davy? To go off with Blackjack Davy? Well, I'll forsake my house and home, and I'll forsake my baby, and I'll forsake my husband to be with Blackjack Davy. Love my Blackjack Davy.
Thanks to Steve Roud for creating the index that serves as my primary inspiration and research tool, the English Folk and Dance Society and the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library for hosting said index in an easy-to-use website, and the following artists for not suing me over my claims of fair use on their songs. Martin Carthy, Elliott Smith, Bob Dylan, The White Stripes, The Skells, Peggy Seeger, Limelighters, Waterboys, Ian and Lorna Campbell, Woody Guthrie, Almeda Riddle, Nick Jones, Mike Watterson, The Decemberists, Hedge School, Steel Eye Span, Bill Harrell and the Virginians, Taj Mahal, Revelin Crook, Norman and Nancy Blake, Rebecca Pigeon, The Incredible String Band. Apologies to anyone I forgot or couldn't find the name of. If you've enjoyed or been intrigued by any of the music I've played for you on this show, I'd suggest you look up those bands and their albums. You can find most of them either on any major music purchasing site or on their band's websites. Support them. They're all great. For more information on Raggle Taggle Gypsy or Blackjack Davy, you can do what I do. There's a free, easily accessible library of information available online, and I can tell you how to get to it. Open up your internet browser, go to the search engine of your choice, and you're there. Thanks so much for listening. You can find me at my full name, MATTAUKAMP, on any of the modern social networking sites. You can find our blog at myroudjourney.tumblr.com, and check back in hopefully in 2 weeks, where we'll be talking about the song The Unfortunate Rake, better known as The Streets of Laredo. Take care, folks.